I would like to introduce a very special guest back onto the channel. We're going to be talking about silver, and I think you're going to want to listen to what my guest has to say, since he called the silver bull all the way to the top in 2011 and the bear back down again, and now he's finally buying, and we're here to find out why. Some of you may know him as the Crypto Cobra, the Silver Guru, or perhaps even a member of COINTELPRO, but now in his current incarnation he's known as Scruff McDudington or Don Harold. Don, how are you?
I'm doing good, Johnny, but I have to correct you. I didn't call the bull market. I was buying ahead of the bull market, and I sold into it. So I was buying from 2000 until 2010, the last month in 2010, and then from December 2010 until, I guess, March or April or May of 2011, I sold all my silver. So I didn't particularly call the bull market. I just bought in advance of it.
Well, thank you for the correction, and that certainly makes you look even better. So that's a good thing. I was gonna ask before we get started with silver, how do you come up with your name, Scruff McDudington?
Actually, it's pretty funny. You know, you're the only person who's ever asked me that, so we got to go back in time.
Okay.
In the late 80s, I had a friend of mine, and he and I would play a game called Starfleet Battles, which is a Star Trek themed role-playing turn-based game.
Right.
And we also played a game called Axis and Allies, and another sort of, you know, not role-playing, but a turn-based game. And we played another game called Car Wars. I mean, these are old school games. I mean, so while we'd play these games, we would listen to albums like Metallica, and Justice for All was an album we listened to, or Testament, Practice What You Preach. We'd listen to Queensryche, Rage for Order, and Operation Mindcrime, or we'd listen to old school Pantera. This is Pantera before they became the band that people know today. This is when they were sort of more mainstream metal sounding. I was a guitar player, and it was just kind of a running joke that I wanted to be a rock star. So we'd play these games all night long, and we'd give each other nicknames. And somewhere in there, he called me Dude, which is a very common thing, but he also, the word rock star was in some sentence. And so Dude and rock star were kind of, you know, brought together. And then he started calling me Dude Rockington, Dude Star Rocker, Rock Dudington, Dude Rockstar, things like that. So over the years, I've just gravitated toward making these ridiculous names. So Scruff McDudington harkens back to Dude Rockington from 1988.
Right. That makes total sense now, because I've always wondered about your strange monikers that you adopt, and now it will make sense.
Well, so, and the other one you were asking about was, you said Crypto Cobra, and that was the Silver Cobra, and that's because there's a band called Limp Bizkit who has a song called Gold Cobra, and so I thought that song was, it's got a line about taking money to the bank. If you know the song, just go check it out. But anyway, there's a line in the song where Fred Durst, the lead singer, says something about you can take that to the bank or something. And right. I thought, hey, I talk about banks, and so I talk about silver more than gold, so I'll be the Silver Cobra. That's what
Oh, got it. Yeah, I haven't listened to much Limp Bizkit, but my wife really liked them, or likes them. We nearly went to see them play in Amsterdam recently. But I do like their music, but I've never really been into them. But,
well, that's where those names come from, and they're really childish and they're dumb. But I don't do it for any other reason than I think it's funny. I literally, to me, Scruff McDudington is actually funny, and it makes my kids laugh. It makes my wife laugh. So that's.
I get it. I completely get it. We're always. With my family, we're always thinking of stupid names, and I do try to think of the silly nicknames as well in pretty much any forum or chat room that I'm on. And when I used to play a lot of role-playing games, I would do the same thing, but online role-playing games. I think.
So are you familiar with Starfleet Battles?
No. I'm talking about computer games that I would play online. So okay. I used to have a nickname called Deadly Jumping Johnny. That wasn't actually me. The full name was Deadly Jumping Johnny of the Biscuit Clan. but that was a name that one of my friends came up for me. Right? Yeah.
It's funny how those things come about. I mean, I something that 30 years ago was a running joke between a friend of mine and I playing late night games, listening to heavy metal is now something I still do at 50. So whatever.
Yeah. It's quite funny. Well, thanks for clearing that up, because it's been causing many sleepless nights here in.
Sure, and that's why we're here to talk about that. So I guess.
Yeah. All right. So I thought let's just jump straight into it and talk about the price action. I mean, I don't see, apart from target levels that I see that could be hit, I don't know why the price action's happening. I saw in a recent video of yours that I don't think you know either. And frankly, should we even really care about it?
Okay, you're talking about the fact that silver is at 14 and change roughly. Is that?
Yes.
Like, why is that happening?
Yeah, I mean, I thought I'd just throw it out there because personally, it doesn't bother me, but maybe there is some kind of theory about how there's some evil guy pulling levers.
Well, I mean, I think that it would. I mean, in my video the other day, I was being kind of sarcastic about that because that's always the go-to story, the banker doing something. But I think you're never really going to know the fundamental story. And I'll give you an example. If you look at how much silver was used in photography a generation ago, and you can go look this up online, something like half of all silver produced was used in photography a generation ago. And now, of course, no one does any of that. So, and that was literally half of all silver that was ever used. You take that out of the equation, and you're going to have prices that are going to be, you would think, depressed slightly. You know, that half of production run not being needed. So you can make that case, but you can also make the case that solar panels have taken up the slack. You can look at the charts that show you the amount of silver in solar panels in the last 10 years is increased many-fold. So I don't know the fundamental story. I know that when you look at something that has pulled back in terms of price action like precious metals has, silver specifically, the forces that drove it up and the forces that drove it down are probably equally wrong. So where we are now, if you adjust for even a modicum of inflation, seems like we've got to be $4 or $5 an ounce light. And that's
I agree.
Generous with that. So, not to sound like too much of a doofus, but I don't know that any fundamental story makes more sense than another. I think inflation, and I think that's probably the biggest story I'm looking at right now. Coming inflation, which isn't here yet.
That is a very, I think, very prescient point of view, for sure. Because that's one of the only things that I'm thinking of as well, because it seems so cheap to me for it to, I mean, it's not been at this level for, was it 8, 9, maybe 10 years? I think I've got a chart that I'm looking at, and I'll put that on my video. I can give you the chart if you want. Yeah, so the last time I saw it here around, I think I was looking at SLV, yeah, so that's like $1 lower. But still, it's 2009, 2010 maybe?
Yeah, I mean, what you're looking at in terms of prices now, you go back to, these prices happened in 2015. But before that...
Oh, yeah.
They first broke above these prices, say, in 2006. And then they came back down in 2009 and 8. And then, so, really you're talking about 10 to 12 years ago.
Yeah.
And people argue that prices are going to go lower from here. I suspect they probably will. I mean, I don't know. That doesn't seem out of the question to me. But I'm not buying for the next week or so, right? I'm buying for years ahead. And
of course,
if I don't get the bottom, I don't get the bottom. But whatever.
Yeah. No, I agree. It's just kind of blows my mind to see it pull back like this. I mean, obviously, I think the ETFs played a huge role in pumping the price back in 2011, but
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
that's a story that people don't like to talk about. It's an inconvenient story that J.P. Morgan was the custodian for SLV. Now, you need to understand that J.P. Morgan also supposedly was shorting the paper market. I say supposedly, look, I know that they were actually shorting, but all of these banks are going long, they're going short. And if someone says, well, we know from their books that they were more short than long, it's funny, I don't trust the banks. So why would anyone trust that you even know what the banks are doing, long or short, ever?
Of course.
I think they lie about everything, and even the things they don't lie about, they've got ways to lie. Or back up, even the things that you can't prove yourself they're lying about, it's just indicative of the lies they're telling that you'll never be able to prove.
Completely agree, yeah.
So if you look at the price action, where it's going from, say, 19 or 20 all the way to 50, the entire time the ETFs sold, and I've done videos in the past on this, you look at the month of the high, the total capital put into the SLV ETF was something like, and I'm old, I don't remember exactly what the number was, but let's say $1 billion or something like that. I mean, it's just crazy amount of money. And the bankers were making money every single time that happened. Now, the bankers also made money every time a credit card was swiped at retail, or no, not even credit cards. Since they owned the banks, if any money was used to buy silver and it was something that flowed through a bank in any way, they got a cut. They owned the mines. They owned in many examples, the wholesalers and the miners are owned outright by banks. And so the idea that banks are shorting silver and that's how they make their money, I mean, that's part of the picture. But man, they're making money on every transaction. They don't care. They really don't care. When you hear someone say that now that J.P. Morgan is, I saw this guy named Bix Weir the other day did a video.
Oh, good old Bix.
Good Bix Weir. In that video, he said that, well, now that J.P. Morgan was really, really long, now prices could rise. But hold on a second. Wait. I thought prices were rising in 2011 because J.P. Morgan was really, really short. So I think what you want to do, and this gets back to your original point, I'm sorry to go long on this, but I think the thing you want to do is if something is down now, $36, 72% from the highs. Okay, just 72% from the highs. And you have a long-term outlook, and you're not putting all your eggs in one basket, et cetera, et cetera. I think that it makes a compelling case that even if you didn't buy today, you'll probably get chances coming up here real soon.
Yeah, that's the approach that I'm taking. But I'd also like to ask you, Don, because I'm kind of struggling myself. Can you name anything that is cheaper now than it was 10 years ago?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah?
Yeah, communications.
I meant something physical that you pay for.
Oh, okay. Well, gas prices are probably about where they were a decade ago. I guess if you could,
that's true. Yeah.
You can look at gas prices. In terms of commodities, yes, sugar has been obliterated. I mean, you can pull up any number of commodities. I bet if you look at the chart of corn, let's see here. Corn prices right now are at radically depressed prices from back in 20 years ago. Corn prices are down right now about, 70% or so in the last 20 years. What about, look at feeder cattle. They're about right where they were, but they're down from the highs. So, I mean, yeah, a lot of commodities are down.
Okay, all right. So there is how does that fit in with the inflation narrative then, when commodities are getting crushed?
Well, the inflation narrative hasn't happened yet because there's a couple different ways you can measure money floating around in the economy. Not the amount of money that's been printed, that's at all-time highs, but the amount of money. And I would suggest people look up something called MZM, which is money zero maturity. Money zero maturity, basically, that's money that you're going to spend. It's in your pocket. It's in the cushions of your couch. It's cash you can get on hand that's not tied to some interest-bearing vehicle. So that money, that is something that is, in terms of velocity,
yeah,
generation lows. I mean, that is I don't know. If you go to Google and search MZM chart, Federal Reserve, and the St. Louis Fed has some charts on this.
Okay, I'll check it out.
Yeah, so until that money, and if you look at it, you'll blow your mind how slow the velocity of that is. Even though
Was it MZM chart?
MZM chart, St. Louis Fed, and check out velocity. Look at the velocity, not the amount, but the velocity of it. So if people are not circulating the money that's sitting somewhere, that means it hasn't been distributed into their pockets. And we know that 63% of Americans from a study I saw recently couldn't even come up with $1,000 in an emergency. So the cash is not floating around out there to really get behind stuff. So you can have these depressed prices because the cash isn't out there. It's not, people aren't swimming in cash.
Right.
For that to happen, interest rates have to rise. They are rising. Wages have to come up. They are coming up. There's a lot of push for these minimum wage increases and living wages and all that. And if even a modicum of that happens, people will get more spending money. And at some point, when the banks decide to unleash the lending again, which I know they're never going to do, blah, 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 I hear that all the time. When they do, that's when inflation hits. And this time, inflation, I think, will be insane. I just absolutely believe that.
Yeah, I do remember you talking about this some time ago. And yeah, that makes sense.
So here we are today, and if you could find a way to store up sugar, I'm being legitimately serious about this.
I agree. It makes sense.
At 20-year lows, if you could buy corn at 20-year lows, if you could buy silver at decade lows, somewhere down the road, I don't know when it is, I think people are going to say, wow, I sure wish I'd been storing those sugar packets in my attic.
Yeah. That's really good. I mean, I was more thinking along the lines of cost of living, but I guess things like food, they are in general a lot cheaper. I mean,
I don't know that. Hold on, I don't know that the cost of living is necessarily cheaper because the corn, for example, and in sugar and all that, these raw materials, those prices are depressed. But on top of that is the production cost. One of my neighbors works for a very large consortium that does stuff with corn, and he points out to me that corn prices can double, they can triple, they can quadruple, they can get cut in half, they can get 90%. And the cost of corn oil is going to be dependent on other factors.
Right.
It's not, for example, if you work at a factory where the laborers are making $5 an hour, that's a bigger impact on the price of corn if they go to $10 an hour than if corn prices double. So corn prices being a very minute portion of the equation, it's like owning a restaurant. When you've got labor costs and you've got food costs, you've got your utility costs. So you can say, listen, my labor costs are really low, but my food costs are high, or vice versa. In this case, if you look at cost outside of raw materials, wages are putting a lot of pressure and are going to continue to put pressure on pricing, making it more expensive, even if raw material prices don't come up. The argument I'm making is that when raw materials prices do come up, then you're going to have that double whammy. It'll be in wages, it'll be banks lending money, and all of that isn't going to really start happening until banks start charging higher interest rates and loaning more money. And if people want to see something really startling, go online and look at charts of loan velocity. Find a chart of loan velocity over the last 20 or 30 years, and then look at that on top of inflation, or look at that on top of precious metals prices. You go, oh, okay. So once those banks start lending money, and I don't want to, again, go long, but it gets kind of boring, but if people say, well, the interest rates don't drive it, interest rates lag, or I don't care what, they're not happening now, okay? So they're going to happen, and it will either be a lagging indicator or it will be a leading indicator, but in either case, prices will rise at some point, and it'll be concurrent with or right after or right before interest rates rise.
Those are all really interesting points. I'll have to check out a few of those. I was just as we were talking, or you were talking rather, and I'll have to open up some of these charts and articles to read myself.
What's weird about the information age in which we live is while we're talking, you and I have the ability to talk across the ocean, and while we're talking, you can look something up on this thing called the internet, and so we can like fact check as we go. It's very interesting. 30 years ago, everything I just said, you have to run down to the library and look up.
Yeah, I really do appreciate the kind of access to information that we have now. But also, I kind of feel like not only is it overwhelming, but I can't trust anything that is broadcast via a major corporation. Even alternative media, I do wonder at where it comes from and the agendas behind it. So it's we're awash in information, for sure.
Yeah, and most of it not very good.
Exactly. But
which, ironically, that kind of gets back to your original point, I think, about price action. The only thing you can really trust is the price action. So.
Yeah, in a way. But then you look at something like Bitcoin, which is just the price action is. I think we were talking about this recently, or it's gross. The price action is just disgusting. And I was in a chat room with a few other guys, and they made such a good point, and they said, well, it's just more noticeable now because there's so much more money involved, but these guys have been throwing the price around since it was like pennies, since it was just a few bucks. There are people that are sitting on hundreds of thousands of Bitcoin that can just trash the market if they want to, and it's no different than large banking cartels doing what they want and just protecting their own interests.
Well, I would wonder about you saying so much money in Bitcoin now.
Well, there's a perception of it, at least.
Yeah, okay, yeah. So I would wonder. I mean, if you look at a long-term chart of Bitcoin, and you look at the, I'm curious. I mean, do you know? I mean, is the dollar volume in Bitcoin skyrocketing? Is it collapsing?
It's declining, as far as I know.
Yeah, I mean, I've done videos in the past where I've looked at it, and even when Bitcoin prices were skyrocketing, you didn't get the rise in actual dollars going into it. I mean, prices were moving up, but I didn't see. In fact, someone showed me a chart. I haven't done this in about a year now. I haven't looked at it. So in all fairness, I could be wrong now, but a year ago, you could look and see that the transactions were actually either stagnant or going down.
Yes, yeah.
Is that still the case? I mean, I don't know. I haven't looked at it in a while.
I haven't checked the transactions, but I can do that real quick.
And that would be. I mean, I don't know how that's healthy for the market if less people are.
In my opinion, there's so much that's unhealthy about the Bitcoin market, at least for the medium term, that it's kind of sad. But so transactions are stagnant. I'm looking at since January this year, there is a very slight uptick. So we're today, let's say, so for today, transactions are around 230,000, that's 232 million, I believe. Whereas at the start of the year, it was somewhere around 170 million. At the peak of the bubble, somewhere around December or January, it was around, call it somewhere between 300 and 450 million, depending on where you choose. I believe. So, I mean, I'm looking at this. It says K in it, but I don't know if that's in thousands or if this is just hundreds of thousands that it's being displayed. I'd have to check.
Well, when I ask this question, I'm not being funny. Do people use Bitcoin is Bitcoin at Amazon yet? I mean, can you use it at Walmart? Like where?
It's funny because I saw more places offering their services for Bitcoin back in 2014, 2013 than I do now. It seems to me that we've gone from using it as a currency to a complete speculation vehicle. So now we're more, I guess the Bitcoin community is more concerned with this so-called institutional money and these ETFs, which how can an ETF be approved when the market is so clearly manipulated by exchanges and huge players? I mean, I find it very hard to believe that. ETFs aside, how do you regulate a market like that? I think it's amazing that it managed to make it to, the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, That's where the futures trade.
You're talking ETFs or the futures?
Oh, I'm talking about the ETFs that are supposedly going to be approved. I'm kind of jumping around.
But I don't understand the whole need for futures or ETFs. I thought the beauty of Bitcoin was anybody could just go to localbitcoin.com and get something, and there's no banker in the middle, there's no transaction fees. It was all money for the little guy, and I don't understand what's the purpose. So let me get this straight. So people believe that instead of owning Bitcoin, they would rather own an ETF.
No. The point is the community sees the ETFs as a way for this flood of money to come in from the supposed little guy, which I guess Bitcoin was originally supposed to be for, to pump the price.
No, I mean, I understand that. I'm asking something different.
Okay.
I'm trying to figure out is, okay, why would the consumer want to own an ETF, which is a paper representation of a digital representation of something that's denominated in US dollars, which is a paper currency? I don't understand why you want another level between you and those dollars. Why not just own the Bitcoin? Why not just go down and get yourself some Bitcoin? Why do you need an ETF? I don't understand that. What would be the purpose of an ETF?
It is a conundrum, and the only answer that I can give to that is that it is technically still too complicated for people to access. So.
No, stop. No.
Oh, I said that's the only answer that I can give because.
I know you and I, but hold on. We know what this really is. Wall Street has figured out a way to scrape some out of every transaction like they do with everything else. And if they can gussy this up and make it look like a really good, safe proposition for, mom and pop, that can be the only explanation, because the technology exists. It is not that complicated to get Bitcoin anymore. It really isn't. And you go to Coinbase right now.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I do see there are some genuine use cases for Bitcoin that I actually think are beneficial. You have, I mean, if you're in Venezuela or Iran, would you rather be holding whatever they have than Bitcoin? Even though Bitcoin's died for the most part of this year.
First of all, I think if you're in Venezuela or Iran, the least of your problems is the amount of money you got in your pocket. I think you're trying to figure out how do you get out of town.
That is true. But I think there is definitely a case for being able to transfer value very easily. And also, obviously I've got no way to verify this. I saw a post from someone who said they were an immigrant in the US, and where they came from, I don't know where it was from. Their family needed something like $25 for some medication, and it was very easy for them to send it back and do that. And I don't know how legitimate that is, but if that's what it's really being used for, that's something which isn't such a bad thing. But it's not. You don't hear people talking about that as the use case.
But, that's fine. I mean, I don't disagree with you on that. And of course, I'm not here to make a case against Bitcoin, but it seems to me that's a great idea, but you better start being able to handle more than 7 transactions a second. And that blockchain's a little unwieldy, and I mean, seriously,
Yeah, it's true.
We hear about the geniuses who created Bitcoin, but what kind of genius was it who said, I know, here's what we'll do. We'll make something that's harder and harder to do with a ledger that gets bigger and bigger to the point when if you try to download that, you'll never, it's impossible. And we'll then make it to where the only people that can mine it are folks with warehouses in countries like China and the aforementioned Iran and North Korea. And that's going to help the little guy. That's a great idea, to pit them against literally warehouses of computers, creating something that then, as the prices rise, our enemies around the world can then dump those for our dollars, something that they made using computers in warehouses in slave labor camps. I don't understand how that's a positive. I mean, maybe
I agree. It's one of the things which I find rather disheartening about the whole direction that it has been going. I don't. Obviously I've done some mining in the past, and it was a lot of fun. It was a great hobby, but now it's very hard to mine.
I don't understand. I mean, I'm philosophically, Johnny, I don't get it. I mean, if you're a libertarian and not you, but anyone,
Sure.
and you're interested in a free market, how is it a free market when any of the bankers, J.P. Morgan, Goldman Sachs, they can go on down to Best Buy or wherever they get their computers, and they can set up server farms, and they can do that with money you'll never have, and they can turn those things on and mine and mine and mine and mine and literally create, quote, money out of thin air in a way you will never be able to in 1,000 lifetimes. How is that for the little guy? I just don't understand that. I have no clue why people think that's a paradigm that helps the little guy. Do you have an answer? I'm asking, I mean, do you have an answer for why people think that's for the little guy?
Oh man, I think that the community would say something along the lines that it's not entirely centralized in Asia or in where these huge warehouses are based, and it's more decentralized than ever because there's, I don't know, yeah. I really can't answer. I can honestly answer that question.
So that means that we've got server farms of, 100 trillion terabytes of RAM grinding through, what used to be Minecraft and World of Warcraft or whatever games, and now they're mining Bitcoin with these things. And literally speaking, with quantum computing right around the corner, you're going to be the little guy happy because it's, quote, decentralized, when in fact it's giant server farms, quote, decentralized all over the globe. So you're up against server farms, and you've got your little laptop that you're playing Fortnite on, and and that's fighting for resources to mine your 0.000000001 Bitcoin, and that's the wonderment of the decentralization.
Yeah.
I don't get it. I don't understand that.
No, I agree. I'm becoming more and more confused as the years go by. I'm wondering what this really was about.
And you know what they ought to do, Johnny? You know what they ought to do? Here's what they ought to do. They ought to go ahead and create, a cryptocurrency where it's all pre-mined, all right? And it's 100 gajillion of these things. And then what they do is they put on flash cards or USB sticks or something like that, memory sticks. They put random amounts of these, from one of this coin to 1 million, and they make millions and millions. They put them on millions and millions of these little sticks, and they say, listen, on a certain day at a certain time, we're going to dump all these into a stadium in some city somewhere in the world. And it's every man for himself. Just take as many out as you can possibly get and make that like a reality show with cameras watching them all fight over those memory sticks. And that would be, and the whole world would go to that as the monetary system, and whoever had the most would be the guy at the top. And so we'd start all over again, and it would be kind of a blood sport, like gladiators fighting for those memory sticks. That'd be awesome. I would love that. That's a great, and you could sell advertising around it. And in fact, the advertising you could sell could be paid for by another cryptocurrency, and that would be the ad dollar. And so people could buy the ad dollars, and there'd be like an ad dollar / gladiator dollar exchange in some way.
Well, I think that you should start up the Dudington coin, and each individual Dudington can be a duty. Oh man, that kind of blood sport, you see it on these sci-fi films, and you read about it in old pulp sci-fi and old sci-fi books. Yeah. I do wonder. I mean, what was it?
Couldn't you say then that the value of these was the value of the human blood shed?
Yeah.
these would have the ultimate value. I don't know.
I mean,
By the way, I'm not being funny. I'm saying, there's got to be some other way to distribute these things besides me and my Acer. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, it's a tough one. I mean, you can't have something. It's just impossible to distribute something like that. I mean, you get into the realm of what's that thing called? The basic income, universal basic income, which is somewhat popular in certain circles, and it's being it's been. I remember reading that it was being experimented with nearby in the Netherlands, where I live. In a city called Utrecht, which is just down the road from Amsterdam. I'll have to see how that went, and I know that there was some experiments with villages in Africa, and yeah, I do wonder where we're going to go with that. It's a big question.
Wasn't Utrecht a character from the Lord of the Rings?
Utrecht, perhaps. It does sound like one, doesn't it? Yeah. But actually, a lot of the names around here, they would go pretty well with a Lord of the Rings character. I'm sitting outside a Brandveer, which is a fire station, but Brandveer sounds kind of like some kind of dwarf, doesn't it?
You should have Panama Orange on as a guest on your show.
You think that he'd be interested? I was just thinking of one. I was just wondering over the past couple of days if he'd be interested in chatting.
Yeah, I think he would, and he'd probably give you more intelligent banter. He'd probably have some great stories to tell you, and you guys could talk about. He'll talk about whatever you want to talk about. I think you should have him on.
All right, yeah, I'll get in touch. I'll see if he's interested.
Yeah.
But I guess we should wrap it up before we descend further into the absurd.
Well, hey, listen, I'll talk about anything. So
Yeah.
Talk about Lord of the Rings or role-playing games or bitcoins.
You don't watch much TV, Don, if I remember correctly.
What I watch TV is no longer what anyone watches. It's all streaming. So
Sure.
What I watch is a Futurama, which isn't on anymore, and I've seen each episode 100 times. I find it very difficult to find stuff to enjoy. I've seen every episode of anything I ever wanted. I've binged watched everything multiple times, and I feel kind of empty every time I go to find something because I've seen it, I've watched it. There's nothing else. I'm interested in movies about time travel. I'm interested in movies about alternate universes, documentaries about the holographic universe, things like that.
Right. So what was that, Michael Talbot kind of stuff?
Right, yeah. Now, again, now there's a topic. What do you think about that?
Oh man, it's been so many years since I read that book, but I'll crack it out and happily have a chat about that again.
Yeah, we should talk about that because that's something which, if people don't know, it begins with the double slit experiment.
Oh yeah.
And that's something which if people don't know what that is, I saw a physicist talking about that recently where he said, at this point in the lecture, this is where many people ask, okay, so how do you explain it? And the physicist said, unfortunately, I don't know. I don't have an explanation. He said, if you can find an explanation, there's a Nobel Prize waiting for you because no one has been able to figure this out.
Yeah.
And the double slit experiment really blew my mind. I didn't think it was real the first time I heard about it. I thought this got to be a joke, but it's true.
Yeah, I remember when I read about that, it really kind of, really blew my mind as well. It's really something. But I'll have to crack that book out again.
What do you think about it? Because one of the things, Johnny, that I notice is people will talk about the holographic universe. And I agree with a lot of the science they talk about, but it seems like every person I hear talk about it takes the conversation into some sort of spiritual discussion or some sort of new age sort of, and I like to stick to the science of it all, which is mind-blowing enough. But first of all, do you believe that the holographic universe principle is true? And if so, what do you think is behind it?
To answer that question, I think we should have another chat because I really need to read the book and brush up on it because it's been so long since I've even considered it. and I would wanna have a full answer and an opinion to back it up.
All right, well, I'll tell you what, if you ever want to come on my channel and talk about that, or if you ever want to have me on your channel to talk about it, I'll talk about that for hours. I'm fascinated by that whole discussion. I think it's amazing.
What I do find interesting is that all of a sudden, I say all of a sudden, over the past couple of years, I've heard people talk about simulation theory, and for me, this isn't anything new. This has been written about since pretty much the early part of the last century by science fiction authors. It's this idea that we are living in a controlled environment or a matrix. I mean, yeah, the Matrix was even kind of talking about it. So this whole idea of a simulation is, I don't believe it, but I think it's a fun thought experiment. I just finished a book like a month ago by a science fiction writer from the 70s, Joe Haldeman or something. He wrote The Forever War, and it was basically a science fiction book based on this man's experience fighting in Vietnam, and he just kind of pretties it up with a lot of theoretical physics, and then eventually it touches upon the idea of simulation theory. And I'm wondering, well, why is this such a groundbreaking idea? Because as far as I can see, a lot of people have been talking or thinking about this for many decades.
Yeah, very, very long time. And the first time I heard about this holographic universe was after I'd seen the movie The Matrix.
Right.
And so you start realizing that this has been around for a long time. It's not, even The Matrix isn't where it began.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's really unfair to your listeners now because we've touched on something that you got to really get deep into. So I would just recommend people go out and the Talbot book is good.
Yeah.
There's a documentary on YouTube called, just look up The Holographic Universe. There's one that's like a 5-part documentary. Check it out. I mean, just look at it. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, so this kind of got a lot deeper and a lot wilder than I expected, but it's good. It was really, really interesting.
Well, I appreciate you being on.
Yeah, it's been great chatting, Don. So, yeah, I think we'll stop it here, and it's time for me to go to bed. It's pretty late. I'm pretty early to bed. So, thanks again, Don, and yeah, let's chat again soon.
Yeah, Johnny, take care, man.
Thanks.